Hey, Pete, ever wonder what Steven Spielberg's favorite film is?
You know, Andy, I've heard he loves classics like Lawrence of Arabia, Meet Me in St. Louis.
Imagine chatting with him about why those films resonate with him so much.
That's exactly what we do on our podcast, Movies We Like. We've had incredible guests like actress Dee Wallace, cinematographer Eric Messerschmidt, director Steve Miner, and former Disney animators Tom and Tony Bancroft.
They share their favorite films and the impact they've had on their careers, offering fascinating insights into the craftsmanship and storytelling techniques that make these movies so special.
If you're curious about the magic behind the scenes, subscribe to Movies We Like from True Story FM on your favorite podcast app. New episodes are released on the fourth Monday of each month with early access for our members.
Join us on Movies We Like as we explore the movies we all like with the people who make them.
And Stephen, our people will call your people. Let's make this happen, puppy.
Subscribe today.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself, Matthew Fox, and my normal co-host, Riki Hayashi, are going to be talking about the anime from the 1990s, Neon Genesis Evangelion, or Evangelion. This is, I would imagine that in our listenership right now, 20 to 30% of you are going, oh my God, this is one of the best sci-fi ever, one of the best anime ever. I love this show. I can't wait to hear you talk about it. And the other 60 to 70% of you going, what in the world are you talking about? You may have heard it, you may not have seen it. This is another one of these episodes where this is something Riki knows really well. I haven't known it well, but Riki's been talking about it for a while and a number of the different topics that it opens up. And so we're going to do what's probably going to be the first of a number of episodes on this topic of this show and all the ethical questions that it connects to, both in terms of within the show itself and in the creation of the show. And if you've never seen the show, if you don't know what we're talking about, don't worry. I haven't seen most of the show. I've seen the first 5 episodes. I've seen a video about the lore of it. And so a lot of today is going to be about us taking me and all of you through kind of what the show is about, but also talking about like the questions that it raises. Because again, like the point of this podcast is not as much to say like this character was right, that character was wrong, as much as to say like what are the questions that this show or this movie or this book or whatever is raising for us, and how do we feel about those things? Because I'm only 5 episodes in and already I see deep connections to a number of the things we've talked about on this show, everything from cultural appropriation to mecha ideas to the way sexuality is presented in shows to the idea of choice and do you get to choose whether or not you are the hero, which is a pretty recent episode, to depression and loneliness and how those things manifest in wartime and trauma. There's just so much. I'm sure there's so much I'm still missing. So Riki, why don't you tell us a little bit about your feelings about this show and kind of what made you want it to be something we talked about?
Yeah, thank you. First off, I guess I would say I am by no means an expert. This is actually like not something I grew up watching because it wasn't really available to me back then. You know, you would have to go searching for it. I was aware of it because it was such a cultural phenomenon. I believe it came out in 1995. Yeah. 95, 96 was when it was on TV in Japan. And it is so iconic within anime, within the mecha subgenre, that you cannot help, if you're a fan of those things, you cannot help but have seen the Evas, the giant robots, some of the character models are very iconic and copied, across the industry. But I only watched it, started watching it, I think last year and finished it this year, because it's been available on Netflix, which is a huge boon for all of us to be able to watch it.
And I will say, this marks me as a dirty heretic to some I know, though not you. You can obviously watch it in the original Japanese with subtitles. One of the things that Netflix did is they re-recorded a fairly good dub with good actors. It is not exactly 100% translation. We'll definitely talk about that. But if you're like me and for ADHD reasons or other things like that, subtitles are hard. There is definitely a good dub version of it as well.
Yeah, I I've said this before probably on the show, but I it bears repeating that I prefer subtitles because I can understand Japanese,
Right.
and I think that like especially live action, like acting in live action is kind of different from voice acting, but it's all still acting, and I do think like you lose some stuff if you don't have the original actor like
Yeah.
doing the things. But that said, like I do not fault anyone for preferring the dub for whatever reason. You should watch things in the way that you can enjoy them best.
Right.
So I am like fully not into the debate of like which is quote unquote better.
Yeah.
Whatever is better for you is what you should do to enjoy a product.
For sure.
And like even though like I don't understand Korean, like it's still the same. Like I still enjoy watching like Korean horror, especially a lot of the TV shows and movies in
Hmm.
the original Korean with subs, just because I feel like I'm getting more out of it, even if I'm not understanding the words that they're saying.
For
The
sure.
way that they emote them, I think is more genuine performance.
Yeah.
Even though like I do enjoy some of the performances. Patrick Stewart in particular was on the dub of Naushka, The Valley of the Wind.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It's just such a fun performance. Anyway, back to this. So you mentioned the name
Hmm.
Neon Genesis Evangelion is technically the correct name. I know it gets pronounced both ways. In the Japanese, the way it's written, it's Evangelion. So that
Hmm.
I feel like that's just how it should be said. But and for me, like if you are not familiar with this product and you are still interested in watching it, we are probably going to spoil things, like talk about things that happen. And I already mentioned to you in the pre-show, it doesn't matter as much. Like
Yeah.
this is one of the least plot driven shows I've ever watched. Like I want to make the argument, like a broad argument, that the plot doesn't matter
Yeah.
because frankly, like some of it is just nonsense. Like people have like done deep dives into the lore, and there
Hmm.
is a lore, and it is arguably consistent within itself, but it doesn't make any sense. And there's
Yeah.
not you can't be like, like this is why this is happening. No, not really. And then on top of that, there are multiple endings to this. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but the original TV show was 26 episodes, which is what is available on Netflix, right?
Hmm.
One quote unquote season. And there's an ending to that season. It's a very weird ending. And in fact, like it was not very popular in Japan, I would say. It
Hmm.
unfortunately the creator Hideaki Anno and his animation studio Gainax received a lot of hate mail, death
Hmm.
threats. I've seen pictures of spray painted graffiti like on their studio entrance. So they received a lot of hate for the original ending of the anime run on TV, and I believe a
Hmm.
year later released a movie that was like a retelling of the ending of the last two episodes, I believe, in a
Hmm.
very different way. And so if you're into lore and like a history of a show, like the internal history, like which one is the real ending, right? Is a question among fandom. And now they have released, I believe it's a series of 3 movies
Hmm.
recently, and those also retell the ending in a way, or retell the whole series in some sense. Yeah, it's called Rebuild. The Rebuild of Evangelion is the recent movies, like 1.0 through 3.0. Yeah, so there's 3 movies, and it's one argument I've heard is that it's like that this universe is multiversal and that it's repeating a
Okay.
la the Matrix,
Okay.
and that all of these are real, like they happen, but that it's
Hmm.
like the third iteration or the 10th iteration or whatever, like in the Matrix, the architect guy is like, you're the sixth chosen one or whatever the heck in that scene. I don't know if that's if that's copium on the part of fans. I don't think that the creators have anything they want to say that they intended. They just want to keep making stuff with this product, with these characters, because they find them interesting. And that's the thing. Like when I said plot doesn't matter, this is all about characters.
Yeah.
About the central characters of this show. So like you started, like what do you understand so far of, I guess, the world and then the characters? And we can build off of that.
Sure. Well, and let me start by just kind of like bookmarking a few things that I think we'll talk about in more detail at a later point.
Yeah.
One is, and I think this is an important thing to understand, and it's also try to kind of explain this because I'm going to kind of make a joke about it, but I also think there's a lot to understand here. The next time that I hear someone, as I mentioned, you sent me a long video about the lore of the show, and it goes very deep. And then at the end, it's like, oh, and by the way, very little of this matters, and almost none of this is in the original series, and it's all in like video games and later movies and books and stuff like that. But it is interesting to know all that if you're a lore fiend like I am. But knowing what the lore is, and especially as you said that, because the writers have kind of said that a lot of lore, they were just like, well, this seems fun, let's do this. The next time I hear a white person say, particularly a white Christian, the next time I hear a white person, particularly if they're Jewish or Christian, say, oh, why does it matter that like they named the evil person Shiva, or like drew on like Buddhist or Islamic or some other kind of like iconography for the show? It doesn't matter. It's just a show. I want them to watch this lore video because it is one of the greatest examples I've seen of a shoe being on the other foot. And I do think there's a marked difference, to be clear, because of the power that Christianity and the Jewish stories that are part of Christianity has. But this is like wildly just taking like, oh, you know what? Crosses look cool and they mean something to a lot of people.
100%.
Let's have crosses everywhere. The main story begins with the idea of two alien beings named Adam and Lilith coming to Earth. And for those who don't know, according to Jewish, not in the Bible itself, but in Rashic teachings and other things like that, Lilith is often prescribed to be the original wife of Adam, who wasn't obedient, and so therefore Eve was created. I mean, there's so much to go into there, and I'm not going to do all that here. There's also a reference to the spear that was used to pierce the side of Jesus when he's on the cross. The cross imagery is all over the place. Angels, and I didn't feel offended or bothered by it as a Christian in any way. I think like,
but you were trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, they named them this. What does this mean?
And then when I read the interview, being like, oh, this is exactly what happens so often. This is not someone who really studied this and like got with a midrashic rabbi to like understand. They were just like, oh, this sounds cool. Let's throw it in. Which, again, I think, Christianity could use some punching up at it. And I do think it's different when you do that with cultures that are more often misrepresented. But there was an uncomfortness for me there. And like, I've always intellectually understood why this is so bothersome to people of other religions and cultures. I've never experienced it quite in the same way.
Okay.
And that was just to me, so that was kind of my first real thought about all of it. The second thing, though, as you said, is that
I just want to real quick, like you mentioned the Adam and the Lilith, and then the antagonists on the show are these monsters, right? And they call them angels in the translation.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it's about like the nature of free will. There's a lot of Christian stories. Again, most of these are non-biblical, but where there's and honestly, it's one of the few parts of Christian theology that supernatural gets fairly accurate. Wait, no, I'm gonna take that back. And as another example, there's a lot of stories within Christianity, again, non-biblical for the most part, but about this idea that angels are perfectly obedient to God and that humans are not, and that there's a real question of which one God loves more. The kind of the rebellious child who God is proud of versus the purely obedient one. And that comes up in a lot of pop media, everything from like Supernatural to movie Lucifer. There's a movie from the 90s where they all perch and wear all black, the angels do, and I can't remember the name of it. But the point is, yeah, there's a lot of like that iconography in this movie that is fascinating. But if you go too deep on, you're going to get very frustrated with. And I'm kind of glad that no one on the Christian right has found this yet, because it would be one more source of like massive protest and stuff like that.
Oh, I'm sure they have people are aware of it, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I remember there was a movie called Legion
Mm-hmm.
with Paul Bettany. Is that what you're thinking? Like that one, like he is an angel, and then God has decided to purge humanity, and he defies God and like fights against other angels
That might be it. I know
in a
Paul loved this
diner.
movie, so I'll have to check. But anyway, but to get back to Neon Genesis, I just had to say that because it was such a thing that came so forward to me.
No, I think like this is a very prominent example of cultural appropriation, right?
Right.
Of cherry picking names and lore from Christianity with, in my opinion, like I not really a depth of understanding
Mm-hmm.
or respect
Yeah.
to the original. Like I
And
wouldn't say that it's like intentionally disrespectful, but I don't think it is done in a way to be like this is our understanding of Christianity and how we want to interpret it. I think
yeah.
they just like took the names from.
Yeah, I mean, I use it as kind of a throw off example, but like think about Western stories where like the bad person is named Shiva or some other Hindi god, or something like that. Um, because again, like I said, it's like it's not that it's let's make fun of this. It's just, hey, this is in the overculture.
Mhm.
I I think another thing that I really recognize about the show, and here's again why I think you're right, the plot doesn't matter. Think about your basic superhero movie. Um, we are at the point now where there's a well-established trope of how a superhero movie goes. And some of them are interesting because they break the trope, but a lot of them are interesting because they say, what if it's a different kind of superhero, but in the same trope? And it'll be they get powers, they're reluctant to use the powers, they're convinced to use the powers, they start using the powers, they become really powerful and good at it. They meet a challenge that actually is the first one who can stop them, maybe, and they have doubts, and then something helps them to, reassert themselves, and then they defeat the enemy, often by conquering their own inner demon in some way, their ego or their inability to connect to others or their fear of goldfish or, whatever the hell it is. In the same way, 3 minutes into this show, I was like, okay, so this young boy is going to wind up being very reluctant to be the mecha pilot, but he's
Mhm.
going to be the mecha pilot, and it's going to be very difficult for him to be the mecha pilot. And at some point, he's going to want to stop being the mecha pilot. But then when he sees this other girl who he thinks is kind of pretty, trying to be the mecha pilot and it hurting her, he's going to decide he has to be the mecha pilot again. And there's going to be a shadowy human conspiracy that's running all of this that has like their own agenda of what's going to happen to humanity, even though they seem to be helping humanity. And at some point, our Scooby gang of ragtag teenage heroes are going to figure all this out and try to stop it. And I know that the ending gets a lot more complicated than that, but very quickly I was like, I don't think there's going to be many plot points that surprise me. But like you said, I didn't really care because I found the characters so fascinating, because I thought it was
Mhm.
such a good job of showing trauma and how trauma affects people, especially young people, and also of exploring that question that we talked about just a few episodes of to what extent do you get to decide, I don't want to fulfill my destiny. I don't want to be the person who has to risk it all in order to save everybody else, because it is very much a show where everyone in the show is you know guilting him or straight up bullying him or rejecting him if he won't, telling him he's got to be the one to get himself into this mecha and go and save the day.
Yeah, so let's set the stage a little. The main character is
Hmm.
Shinji Ikari. He's the young boy who is the pilot of the EVA-01.
Which,
And so the
here I have a
mechas
question
in the
for you.
show are called Evangelion, shorthand is EVAs.
Here I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Some characters refer to him as Shinja, some as Akari.
Well, his
And
name is Shinji Ikari
right. Well, and I
in
know
the
that like
Western sense. So
let me finish. But I'm asking this because I know that I know in a Western sense what it means when someone refers to someone as their first name versus by their last name. And I kind of but I don't know in a Japanese sense what is being conveyed when someone uses the first part of his name or the last part of his name.
I would say in general, someone who um, calls him Shinji is closer to him.
Mhm.
Like it's a friendlier way to call someone. Um, and then yeah, because his last name Ikari, like you might say Ikari-san, which I don't think they do. I think pretty much everyone calls him Ikari-kun, and
Mhm.
kun is the suffix basically for like a kid, like a young kid, young boy. So, and then his father is in this as well, right? Like if you met him,
Yep.
yeah. So his father is a character, Gendo Ikari, and they might refer to him as Gendo or Ikari-san. Again, san is like the more adult, respectful suffix to
Mhm.
the last name. So I think most of the adults probably call him Ikari-kun, and
Mhm.
then the other mecha pilots or his classmates at school might call him Shinji.
Yeah.
So you've met him. You've met Rei
Yep.
Ianami, right? The other pilot so far, and she's a girl. And Rei in particular is very iconic within the
Mhm.
fandom, within just like anime. She is like the prototype, kind of like I guess nowadays we would call them manic pixie dream girls, right? She's
Mhm.
got the colored hair. It's what is it like a she's her hair is blue, and she is mysterious
Yep.
and like we don't know everything about her. She's very quiet, but also a very good pilot. So she's got like all these qualities
Right.
that it's set up in the beginning as like, oh, like you would expect that she is going to be his love interest on this show.
And yeah, and when we meet her, she's also very badly injured from the last time she was a pilot, and that's
Yeah.
part of why he's being pushed into it. I found the introduction of her character, especially with the two other young women in his life, very interesting, and I want to kind of ask more about that because so he is supposed to be a young teenager. He's 14, and I
Yes.
think Ray is also a similar age.
Yeah, they're classmates.
Right.
Like all of this because it's an anime, all of this takes place like partly in this futuristic like military battle station,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
I
there's also a school in this
I
town where
completely
they go to
expect
class.
there to be some drama over who asks who to the Japanese equivalent of prom. Like that's the kind of vibe I'm getting from it. But the first two women he meets are older. I think they're supposed to be like also teenage or like very young adult. And they're portrayed like trying to kind of best phrase it. Their attractiveness and their sexuality is very forward in terms of their characters. Like we see a lot of like the bent over shots and things like that. We see a lot of like the other boys all being obsessed with how hot those two are. And the two older women kind of joking about like which one of them is going to try and date Senji. Again, I feel like it doesn't feel inappropriate because that's why I think they are also in high school with him, but it's like a 17-year-old, 14-year-old kind of a thing. But it's very interesting to me that like on the one hand, you have him being bullied by these two very attractive older women, which I'm sure caused a lot of people at young ages to have a lot of feelings that they're still figuring out 20 years later. And nothing wrong with that. But but the idea that he has these like two women who are being very kind of sexually aggressive towards him, not necessarily in a hitting on way, but in like he's constantly like walking into rooms and seeing all their underwear and blushing a lot and feeling uncomfortable, contrasted with this shy, demure, but incredibly skilled manic pixie dream girl who seems like he has his actual interest.
Yeah, okay. So let's see. You're referring to the first one I would say is Misato
Mm-hmm.
Katsuragi, right?
Yeah.
She is, I guess I would call her the handler for the evil
Yep.
pilots. I'm not sure how old she's supposed to. She's definitely supposed to be older than them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I would guess like early 20s, but like
Okay.
old teenager is a possibility.
I
Well,
thought I saw her as like a senior in the high school, but I could be wrong on that.
So getting into the lore, there was an event that happened, I believe, 15 years ago, and she was a young girl.
Mm,
So she might
okay.
be like 20 to 25, I guess is probably the age range I would place her at.
Okay.
Because the depiction of her in the flashback is definitely not no younger than like 6.
4 or 5. Yeah, 6. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, you're right about that.
And then who's the other one you're referring to? Is it Ritsuko
I
Akagi,
think so.
the scientist?
Yeah, the blonde woman,
Yeah.
and she's the
Okay.
one who's constantly because uh, Masoki, is that correct?
Misato.
Misato. Misato, like one of the first things she does is get him to move in with her, and talk about how they're going to party and hang out and have so much fun. And at which point the scientist starts teasing her about like, so how is things with your boyfriend and stuff like that. And
Yeah, and Misato's character again is like, this is 1995. Like anime as a genre is 20 years old. Like mecha anime is like 20 years oldish.
yeah,
But still like Rei and Misato, like these characters have become archetypes of the genre because they're
hmm
so iconic. And yeah, she is the older like caretaker, but very flirty. I mean, I'm just gonna say she's an alcoholic, right? Like she
yep,
drinks every night to the point of often passing out or just like being sloppy drunk. And so like I don't I think some aspects of this have not aged well or like are now things that we would not want to see in our media, like
hmm
are inappropriate, right? Like her being drunk all the time around a young boy who she's living with and supposedly the caretaker of and is kind of flirting slash teasing aggressively, like in a
hmm
sexual way. Yeah, like I was watching, I was like, yeah, like this is what it was like in 90s anime, and
hmm
I don't think we would do that anymore.
right. I mean, and like,
Although maybe they do, and that's a problem.
well, and I just want to say, like, I think there's something where the cultural view has shifted, and it certainly was not just Japanese anime. Like,
Yeah,
I was watching music videos like Hot for Teacher in the 80s and 90s, which
sure.
are all about like
The
13-year-old
older
boys
woman,
getting hit
yeah.
on by adult strippers,
hmm
who are also their teachers,
I mean,
So
yeah, like I watched Dawson's Creek, where there's a storyline where a high school teacher ends up having a sexual relationship with one of her students.
right.
Like, yeah, it is definitely like a unfortunate fantasy that gets portrayed.
hmm Yeah, well, and just even moving beyond that though, but I just did find it very interesting the contrast of like as you said, the manic pixie dream girl who's his age and who is even shyer than he is, versus the woman who is like very aggressive in her I mean in
hmm
everything, in her drinking and her sexuality and all of it. And it was just a very interesting contrast. And but I will say though that while like I roll my eyes at how much the camera focuses on some of the shot, the anime camera as such as it is,
It gets worse.
I'm sure it does. But all of
Sorry to
them
say.
are I think it'd be easy to think that I'm just dismissing it. I'm more raising it because I think it's an interesting cultural issue of how these things become icons, but they're both very well developed characters. Like
Yes,
she
yes,
doesn't
that's the
drink
thing.
because wouldn't it be funny if the character is drunk all the time? She
No,
drinks because, as you said, she was horribly traumatized as a girl. Like
yes.
in some ways, if you
And
look at
she's
her,
she's got an impossible job, right? To
yeah,
send these kids into life or death situations. Like this is her coping mechanism.
yeah,
And it is played for laughs a lot, like her drinking, but the moments when she has like moments of self-reflection, you absolutely feel the pressure on her
hmm
and the depths of her despair over the situation she's in and that she's forced to put these kids in.
especially because I think at this point, granted, I'm only a couple episodes in, she's probably my favorite character,
hmm
in part because although she joins in the like bullying and pushing him to be part of this mecha program, she's also the only one who shows concern for him and care
Yeah.
for him. And like early on, she doesn't want. They're kind of like, "Oh, you just showed up. By the way, there's an angel that's attacking. You've got to jump in this mecha and go fight it 5 minutes after you said hello." There's no training montage until like a couple episodes later.
Yeah.
And but then once the others make the argument of the whole city is going to be destroyed unless we kill this angel, she joins in that. And to give people an extent of just how far this goes, as Riki mentioned, the boy's father is part of this program. He's kind of leading up this whole program. He's leading up Nerve, which is this like super secret, government funded, but even the government doesn't really know what it's doing, kind of like science-y tech organization, shadowy organization, which again, if you feel like that's a cliche, you've seen this organization 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
But even the father says, the father hasn't spoken to the boy in 3 years. The father clearly says, I brought you here to be a mecha pilot.
Yeah.
If you are not going to be a mecha pilot, I have no use for you. Like, there's no sense of like, oh, by the way, you're my son, and I just want to see you and be with you and help raise you. There's none of that. And I think that's part of where her concern for him really comes from.
Yeah, Gendo, his father Gendo is a disgusting character. I don't think there's any way around that. Like the way he acts towards Shinji is just, it's not as a father. Like the only time he acts as a father, I'd say, is to manipulate Shinji, like through their familial bond. And otherwise, all he cares about is his project.
Right.
And the situation with Rei too, I believe at this point, like you don't know their full backstory, but you understand that Rei is very important to Gendo, perhaps even beyond just being a pilot.
Right.
Like there's more of a sense of affection Gendo has for Rei than for his own son Shinji. And I'm not going to spoil this point, but there is definitely a reason and a secret behind
Right.
that.
Yeah, I've read a bit in the plot summaries of what that is, but I agree that we don't need to spoil that because we're not going to talk about the show a lot. I want to give people a chance to go watch it because I think it is very enjoyable so far and very thought provoking.
So
The other
have
thing that we
you?
learn about the father is that, as I said, he's a member of that secret. He's the leader of Nerve, and we sort of see these meetings of this like very shadowy secret council that is
Yes.
sort of, and they talk about the human. Is it called the Human Finality Project?
So yeah, let's talk. So Nerve is the organization that Gendo runs. That's underground where the Evas are. They report to. It could be called Seal, or I've also heard it pronounced Zeal in like a German pronunciation. And they are like the World Council in Avengers. Like there are no people in Seal that we see, right? Like it's a
Right.
bunch of, I don't even like um the things from 2001. They're just like tablets floating in space that the voices come out of type of thing. So it's like this secretive council. And have they mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls yet?
Those have not been mentioned yet, but I do know that
But
that's a
that
big.
that is a thing, again, has nothing to do with like the actual Dead Sea Scrolls, other than like a name, and I guess they're like an old thing that you can read. And that's what they are basing all of this on, is that there were like prophecies on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so what you got to, it is called, the translation is called the Human Instrumentality Project, which is
Instrumentality, that's
what
it.
they are trying to work towards.
Right.
And the interesting thing about this is the Japanese, it is called the Jinryu Hokan Keikaku. And the instrumentality part, like the human and project, like those are simple translations. The instrumentality part, Hokan, I feel like the original English translation of this kind of dropped the ball, because Hokan has much more of a like meaning of like protection or something like that. Like instrumentality is such a weird word to plug into this. And I
Yeah.
and in one sense, I guess it makes it a little mysterious. But the original Japanese makes it clear that this is like for the protection of humanity.
Okay, that makes sense. Should mention also that the obviously it sounds like it is pronounced differently in Japanese. The name of that organization, though, Zeal, is a German word. It's a German word for soul, which
Okay.
I know also
Yeah.
plays a lot into the sort of cosmology and theology of this whole the whole what's going on here. And I think this is an appropriate time to also talk about that. Well, actually, let me go a little further than that. And so, again, I don't want to spoil too many things because I want to give people a chance to watch it. The next episode, we're probably going to go full spoilers. But the involvement of the father in that kind of shadowy council that's doing this, I think also really lends itself to the not only is he completely ruthless in the protect humanity just with by killing the angels, but he also has some like other things of like there's this larger project that's not just
Yeah.
about this. I think this is also a good time to mention something we hadn't mentioned, but it seems very vital to the show. This is not set in an Earth like ours today. It is very much a post-apocalyptic, dystopian kind of a world where we're slowly learning more and more about what happened. But there was a great event that people are being taught that it was a meteor that hit the Antarctica and melted the entire polar ice caps. And so, like, there's been huge flooding and that kind of thing, and the wiping out of a lot of cities. That there's been massive wars back and forth, and including some nuclear attacks back and forth. And one of the things that happens in the first episode that I wanted to talk to you about, and again, not asking you to be the expert or speak for all Japanese people by any means, but you have more insight in it certainly than I do. In the first episode, the military, like, they don't want to work with Nerve. They're convinced that they can defeat the angels by themselves. And when all of their normal weapons don't work, they go to what they call the N1 mine. And they never say the word nuclear, but I think it is there's a mushroom cloud, there's a bright light. It is very clear to me, at least, that this is supposed to be a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
What did, just speaking for yourself, like, and I've heard you talk about the effect of having been the victim of a nuclear bombing in Japan, and how much that shapes the Gojira movies and things like that. What was the effect of seeing a nuclear bomb exploded by the Japanese on Japanese soil so early in this show? Because that felt to me like it was a very specific, like, we are crossing this cultural line to show you just how dystopian we are.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, 1995, we've already had Akira, and I can't remember the history of that, but there were subsequent nuclear detonations in Japan. I believe
Mm-hmm.
Tokyo in that one, because they're Neo Tokyo. So I don't know. I that's something I don't know about. Like, there in Japanese media, there's probably definitely an era of this post-apocalyptic future, and I think it's just same with a lot of Western media,
Mm-hmm.
that to reach that point of where you want this dystopian future, it probably has to be nukes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so you mentioned the asteroid, the what they call an asteroid or meteor, I guess.
Right.
They call it the second impact on the
Mm-hmm.
show, and that implies there was a first impact, and there's going to be a third impact. Like, that is supposedly what they are trying to prevent, is the third impact. And again, this is where I say, like, the plot doesn't matter. I guess they know about it from the Dead Sea Scrolls. But that's just like very Deus Ex Machina, like, oh, we know about this third impact thing from the Dead Sea Scrolls, don't worry about it. There's nothing like kind of beyond that. Like, the thing with the angels, there's no we never really find out, like, who or why, other than, like, it's happening. The Dead Sea Scrolls told us that there would be, I believe, 15 angel attacks. So that leads to an interesting tension and countdown on the show, because every time an angel attacks, like, you are told what number it is.
Right.
Or the audience is told, and it leads to the sense of, like, okay, like, now we're at this number, we're getting closer, and then, like, stuff happens and it's not clear, like, why or who did it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going back to your original question about this. I don't have, like, a strong sense of, like, the nuclear explosion at the beginning. I think it feels like at this point in anime, it is kind of like tropey
Okay,
in a
that's fair.
sense.
It's like
Um,
let's show that even a nuclear bomb won't work as the
yeah,
ultimate way of
exactly.
showing
Like,
that no human control. Yeah.
right. And so only the Evangelions can stop the angels.
Right.
And that's because like the Evangelion technology is based off of, you know, basically angel technology or angel
Right.
DNA or whatever it is. And that's like something that happens a lot in anime is we see it in Robotech slash Macross, where alien technology is like the thing that boosts humanity like past where it is into like a new, more futuristic, especially
Hmm.
in all these things like military technology.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch the first Independence Day and then the second Independence Day, that's very much a theme of it. It's a theme of everything from Ender's Game to all sorts of stuff like this. Even what I think is the way a lot of Americans were first really introduced to the mecha concept, if they didn't grow up watching some of these cartoons, um, the Pacific Rim movies. There's very much a sense of like they have developed in part because of what they've learned from not really the technology, but the remains of these alien beings and
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Yeah, reverse engineering.
Yep, exactly, exactly.
So what? Okay, so what at this point question do you have? Like big questions about?
So one of the questions I have is that it seems like there's only this very special group of people who can pilot the Evas, the
Hmm.
Evangelions.
Yes.
And I know by the lore kind of what the explanation is that we're given much later in the show. I think we are given like a very brief one sentence, like it has to be a child because like the younger mind can better meld with it. But I don't quite understand why it has to be this one of these two particular people, and none of the others, including some of the young adults, none of them could become mecha pilots.
Yeah. Um, it's definitely set up in a way where each unit, like the Eva, like 0102, like they have to be piloted by their pilot, right? Then
Right.
they do. I don't. At some point, they do try to get them to cross pilot because like one's damaged or something, and it doesn't work because there is like a psychic connection between the pilot and the
Hmm.
Eva. I can't remember what term they use on the show, but there's definitely like a you have to be on this correct wavelength or something like
Right.
that. I don't know. Do you want me to get a little spoilery about it? Like how do you
No, again,
feel?
I just want to get a sense of like if there was something we were missing early on. But so is the implication then that this machine was built with the thought that eventually they'd go grab Senji and make him pilot it? Like, was that always the plan for this machine?
Yes.
Okay.
Or at
That's
least that's where I don't know if it was the plan, but that's just what happens
right.
because of the way they are built.
Right.
And that's, I guess, what I will say about that is that this show presents, like, we're calling them mechas, but they are very different from the way mecha have been presented in pretty much all of anime. Like this may be the first one. Um, to this point, stuff like Gundam, I mentioned Macross, there's stuff like Pat Labor in the same
Hmm.
era. They're all just straight robots, right? Like
Right.
they're machines that were built in factories, and you pilot them like you would pilot a fighter jet or a tank, and you fight with them, and that's it. And
Right.
here in Evangelion, they are biomechanical, and they're beings. Like the
Right.
Evas are alive, and they seem to have a personality of their own.
Yeah. I mean, there's a very early scene in which, as part of the attack in that first episode, without a pilot in it, Eva 01
Yeah.
saves Senji from like falling
Yeah,
debris.
Shinji loses
Shinji, thank
consciousness,
yeah.
and yet
But I mean,
it
even
keeps
before
fighting.
that, even before he's gotten in, like its hand reaches out to
Oh
stop
yes,
debris from
yes,
hitting him on the
absolutely.
head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is like the mystery behind them and the connection with the pilots, right? Like
Yeah.
why? Because it's a living being, even though they never talk. Like they have a personality, they have some kind of internal motivation, that
Hmm.
they can only be piloted by their specific children.
Right. And yeah, and again, I think about like one of the things I think about when I think about like Robotech or those kind of things, or all the way up to the Jaegers of Pacific Rim. They might carry weapons, but also they have like all these missiles and guns that are built into them. And as far as we see, this one has like a big spike on its head. It looks more like a kaiju in that regard. But then, yeah, mostly it holds a gun or it holds a knife.
Mhm.
And I, I think the visual design of it is interesting because, yeah, it looks much more sleek. It doesn't look boxy. The only thing that throws me is that the color scheme of it is so aggressively like 90s bowling alley carpet. It's this like purple and green that is just so garish that like it's hard to watch for me. And I'm sure I'll get used to it. And I'm sure that was very much like the cool color scheme at the time. But I just need
I
to
don't
make that
even
one
know if
comment.
it's cool. I think it's meant to intentionally evoke a sense of biology, of monstrousness.
Oh, because for me again, it feels neon. It feels like
Okay,
a
sure.
1990s, look how hit like the kind of like you think of like the neon lights in 1990s like video game centers and stuff like that. That's what it gets to
That's
me.
fair enough. I mean, it the origin could just be like it looked cool, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
But there's definitely no sense like of in other mecha anime like of them being painted. Like
Yeah, that's definitely
I
true.
you do not get the sense that this is like that they were painted this way. This is just like because they're alive, like they were quote born this way. I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure I know we're going to get a lot more into the origin of them and how it ties into the origin of the angels, and there's a lot of lore coming. And this might be a bonus episode. It might be a regular episode, depending on fan feedback. I'm definitely gonna do a full episode just on. Let me dive deep into the meaning of all the
The angels?
well, all of the different Judeo-Christian
Yeah.
let me say it again. The iconography of all of the Jewish iconography and of the Christian iconography, some of which takes on the Jewish iconography. That's a very complicated subject, and the meaning of it and how it appears here, because I do think it's interesting. Well, to the three other theology geeks who are in our listeners, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes, and because so far, as you said, it's not really the plot that matters. There's a fight every couple of episodes, but it really seems to be about how are each of these different people dealing with trauma, and how and the isolation and loneliness that can lead to, and then how are they either helping or hurting each other as sort of different people's traumas bump into each other. And I've talked before about how I have a lot of trauma in my past and a lot of like mental issues related to that. I think it's very easy to just be like, oh, all people with PTSD are like this, or all people who had childhood trauma are like this, or something like that. And the fact that you have everyone is reacting to this same event, but in very different ways. Even if you just look at the two women who are kind of most in his life right now, um, like it's just fascinating to see, and I'm really interested to see how this plays out, especially because it's all against this background of human choice and what is the importance of human agency, and or is that not? Because again, I don't want to go into too much spoilers, but like what we're going to learn is that a lot of the like attempt to protect humans or to instrumentalize humans is about removing their agency, and
Yeah.
that becomes a major part of this whole story.
Yeah. What I love about this, like the imagery is all iconic,
Yeah.
right? The Evas, like I mentioned, the pilots, the they became archetypes for the genre. But the story itself, or like the characters, it's just absolutely fascinating because these characters, there's not like a hero's journey in the traditional sense. It is just about how these human beings react to and are affected by the traumatic experiences they go through, and it's so real.
Yeah.
Like one of the memes for the show, like one of the images that gets reused a lot is Shinji sitting in a chair with his head in his hands, just probably crying or just like in total shock. And that's if you don't feel that as you
Hmm.
go through the show, like maybe you're not paying attention and you're just watching it as like fun robots, which is fine.
Right.
But I had several episodes, like I couldn't binge this. I
Mm.
had several episodes where I finished it, I turned off the TV and basically like did a Shinji pose and just like put my head in my hands and just like thought about it and like what just happened? Like what am I feeling? Like thinking
Yeah.
about what the characters are feeling. I was like, what the heck? Like I was devastated watching it on behalf of the characters. And that
Yeah. I
is
mean,
such a unique feeling that we should treasure, like in media, like to be able to watch something and feel something that deep.
yeah.
It's great,
Yeah. No,
and
I had a similar
it's
experience.
dangerous too. There are definitely going to be points where if you can't keep watching it, like don't, in my
Yeah. No,
opinion.
I think there was an episode I planned to binge quite a lot of it last night yesterday.
Hmm.
'Cause it's about it the episodes are half an hour, so it's, like, all told about, like, 12 or 13 hours, and I had to stop because there was one episode that just hit really hard, and it was
Mm,
really something I related to quite a lot. And
yeah.
the other thing I think that really is striking me, and again, I wanna see how this develops, but as you said, like, a lot of these shows and again, this isn't just an anime, think about, like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like, any of those other shows, Vampire Diaries, where it's, like, one half super either fantasy or tech powers that are allowing you to save the world, and one half, like, will you study for your math test? They've done this very interesting thing of showing that, like, the kids in his life have much more compassion because early on, he's getting bullied from 2 directions. He's getting, like, all the adults are yelling at him and telling him he needs to, like, get in the mecha and save everybody, and it's his duty, and if they don't do it, they don't want anything to do with him. And then there's a kind of classic high school bully situation he's dealing with, because he's the new kid. But the bully actually has a reason. The bully's sister was almost killed in the attack that the Eva eventually destroyed the angel, but, like, broke a lot of stuff on the way to do so. And so the bully's, like, blaming it on him. Doesn't really make much sense, but if you think about, again, how people deal with trauma, people blame the wrong people all the time. And so he does start out bullying, Shenji, and it's adding to just his problems. But then very quickly, they wind up in a situation where they wind up, like, seeing what he's going through, both from outside and then literally from inside the cockpit with him, and more one than the other, but they both start to have a lot of empathy for him in a way that we haven't seen from most of the adults. And again, I think the, like, young people good, adults bad is kind of a trope in a lot of these things, but here it just feels so much more developed, and it really felt like the having both of these groups so mean to him and one of them shifting and the other not feels very intentional in a way I really like.
Yeah, the character you're talking about is Toji Suzuhara. He
Mhm,
will say he starts off bullying Shinji, but they become friends. And the way that develops and where Suzuhara's story ends up for I don't even not even like a top 5 character on the show, like probably in the top 10, barely. That is amazing to me.
mhm,
That you could take such a minor character and develop them so fully and give them, I don't know if I want to use the word satisfying, but a good character arc
yeah,
um in such a, again, like such a short runtime. Like you said, these were 30-minute episodes on TV, so with commercials, like 25 or something,
mhm,
26 episodes of that. Yeah, like barely over 10 hours of television. The things they do are just phenomenal, and I'm
yeah,
blown away by it. I know, like we've had our talks about Star Wars TV shows and Marvel, and like what are they doing with their runtime, and this show just like does everything in its runtime, and
mhm,
still has like a cool mecha battle, but it's how they tell the story within the battles, right? The
yeah,
the battles themselves are also part of the story, not because each angel is different, and it requires them to figure out how to defeat it, and often that reveals something about the characters themselves and how they
yeah.
win that fight. or sometimes fail to win, and it takes like some other pilot coming in to help them or whatever. Like, it's the way that they psychologically use the battles is probably, I don't know, one of the top 3 things about this anime.
We're going to start wrapping up, so I just want to say one last thing and then make a couple of announcements that are important for listeners. The one last thing, we're obviously going to do a number more episodes on this because it raises so many interesting questions.
Oh my god! Like, I didn't even talk about half the stuff because I was like, well, that's a little bit spoilery.
Oh yeah, well, and just that whole, we literally only a month ago did an episode about should people get to say no when destiny calls, and that was kind of exactly what so much of these first episodes have been about. I also will say, if music is important to you, the first song goes the opening song of the credits goes real hard.
Oh yeah, I never skip it.
And in the very kind of classic anime way that, for you this may be different because you can understand the lyrics. For me, this song, like some of the other anime opening music, there's a very sort of discordant aspect to it because the song sounds really poppy. It's very like happy and poppy and like, let's all gather together and hold hands and Care Bear stare and we're going to win this fight. And then as you're reading the lyrics, it's like a cruel angel has decided that you have to face death and all. Like, it's very dark.
I believe the translation for the title of the song is Cruel Angel's Thesis, right?
Yeah.
And it is every part as much of the story as anything else. Like, that's, again, like, they pack everything in. Like, the song itself, the flashes during the opening credits are also like telling part of the story to you. And just like every piece of real estate that they use is not wasted.
Yeah, very much agreed. Very much agreed. Last thing I would so we're obviously gonna do a number more episodes on this. We're also gonna have bonus content for members. Specifically we're gonna talk a little bit more about what mecha is, just the whole like mecha genre and stuff like that. Because it's one that I have very limited experience of. Riki, you've talked some about, and I want to go a little bit deeper into. But I'll give you the normal membership pitch in a moment. $5 a month, $55 a year. You can find it all on the website. But I do also want to let people know, and actually, Riki, I realized I had not told you either. This podcast is going to go into a hiatus during September. We're going to take a couple of weeks off, in part because I'm traveling a lot, in part because we want to spend a little bit more time kind of planning some things out, being able to do more of the research that we've been talking about doing, wanting to have a little bit more of a plan about how we are advertising and how we are letting other people know about these podcasts and helping get more people into the conversation. I want to be a lot more intentional about feedback. We're doing it sometimes, but I'm not getting to it as fast as I want to and as often as I want to. I want to improve that. So you'll still get episodes during September. They're going to be older episodes, rebroadcasts and things like that. So you can hear all those kind of things. But there won't be new episodes for a couple of weeks, but don't worry, new episodes will be coming soon, starting in October. So just want to let people know that. And again, you can become a member and you can send us feedback. We love feedback. We want to hear it. We want to discuss it. All that you can find on the website, theethicalpanda.com, or in the show notes. So please think about becoming a member. For our members, thank you so much. We'll have more for you in a second. And on behalf of myself and Riki, we have spoken.